Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy, and I'm the director of the museum, and today we're going to talk about a location here in Batavia in Genesee County, and one that is very special to us at the museum as it is the topic of our newest exhibit, Memento Mori, and is about the Historic Batavia Cemetery, which in 2023 celebrates its 200th anniversary after its creation. So I'm going to talk about some of the history of the cemetery and some of the important people buried here, at least in a little detail, and show off some of the features that we have of the exhibit, many of them being artifacts from the Cemetery Association that were previously housed at the cemetery. So the history of the Historic Batavia Cemetery doesn't actually begin where it's located currently. So we're going to go back even farther in time to the first Batavia Cemetery, which was built on what is now South Lion Street on the western edge of the village at the time, and it was laid out in 1806. And there were dozens of graves that were put there, including War of 1812 soldiers who died in Batavia while encamped here on their way to Buffalo. However, the spot was right on the banks of the Tonawanda Creek, which caused many problems, especially because the creek was prone to flooding and sometimes bodies would float away. But also the graves weren't dug very deep and could pop up unexpectedly if the weather so chose, with erosion and other factors. So the town fathers got together and decided that the cemetery needed to move to a better location that was more appropriate and more respectful place to bury their dead. So they decided to move it on the complete other end of the village, going east on what was called Cemetery Street after it was put there, and it moved in 1823, 200 years ago. Now this was lot 43 of the village of Batavia, and it was actually originally owned by St. James Episcopal Church and the First Presbyterian Church here in Batavia. So they were sort of managing it, and it seemed like a logical spot in order to put the cemetery, though it was between railroads that went through eventually. The original lot was 88 plots that was laid out by Ebenezer Mix of the Holland Land Company. And eventually, over time, more plots were added going farther east, which you can see here in the map from 1898 behind me, which shows pretty much the modern layout of the cemetery. So we're looking at now almost 600 plots versus the original 88. Now for about the first 2 decades of the cemetery's existence on Cemetery Street, the upkeep of it was very minimal. A different perspective of cemeteries than maybe we have today, of them being very manicured. At that time it wasn't. You had animals frolicking, not a lot of upkeep of the grounds by professional standards. However, in 1840, a wrought iron fence was put in order to keep out most of the animals, and that, at least in portions, is still what's there today. Now, some prominent citizens, ones who would eventually find their final resting place there, sought to improve the cemetery. You had Benjamin Pringle and Eli Fish being the ones who contributed land to add to the cemetery in order for it to expand, and were some of the people that were pushing to better upkeep it. But that came to a head in 1875 when a large group of citizens banded together in order to better maintain the cemetery. Now this group set out to repair that original fence, as well as to put in some paths and roadways in order to allow people to go amongst the graves a little bit easier and help maintain the grounds. This group sort of morphed in 1880 and became officially the Batavia Cemetery Association, now today the Historic Batavia Cemetery Association, which is a nonprofit organization whose job is to help maintain the cemetery and or upkeep it, as well as to deal with new burials, because there are people still being buried in the Historic Batavia Cemetery, as there are still open plots. The cemetery ran that way and still runs that way for generations. In 1990, it had fallen on some more hard times, so went with another restoration project in order to improve it, and has been able to maintain itself well since then, and today we are celebrating their 200th anniversary. One other landmark that came to the cemetery was their outbuilding, which is used to store all of their equipment and things. It has an interesting story, as it was a former bank. Somewhat small building, but it used to be a bank either in Alexander or going out towards Clarence, a small country bank that was moved and placed in the cemetery to function that way. But cemetery is the home of the graves of many famous individuals, including most of the Ellicott family that moved up here to Western New York, as well as Dean and Mary Richmond and many of their children and grandchildren, and the wonderful Richmond Mausoleum. You have the monument to William Morgan, who attempted to divulge the secrets of the Masons all the way back in 1826. You have Eli Fish, the first brewer in Genesee County. Mary Elizabeth Wood, who founded the Chinese library system over in China based on her time here in Batavia. But there are any number of individuals with very prominent ties here to Batavia and Genesee County, and some that we have talked about in previous videos, so be sure to go check some of those out. And most of all, come by and see our new exhibit, Memento Mori, the Historic Batavia Cemetery, 200 years, 1823 to 2023, and see all the wonderful artifacts from both here at the museum, but also from the cemetery itself, as well as some of the mourning practices and how people dealt with death in the past. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the Historic Batavia Cemetery. Well, if you enjoyed this new video on the Historic Batavia Cemetery, please consider giving it a thumbs up or even subscribe to the channel, as it does help us out a little bit and get you notified even quicker when we do release new material. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to go check out the rest of the playlist, as we are at 150 videos now. It seems hard to believe, but we've been able to grow the channel that much. Plus, we also have all of the recordings of our guest speaker series, our concerts, and now our Java with Joe morning coffee presentations. So there's plenty of content to check out on there. But as always, the best way to learn more about anything that you see in these videos, stop by and see them for yourself at the museum, as you can see them up close and personal, and we'll be able to tell you even more information than what we share in these short videos. And if you really do enjoy this content and are considering supporting us in some way, the best way to do that is to become a member of the museum, which is very affordable, and it's the best way to support us, and it's one of the largest ways that we gain support to do all this wonderful content and maintain.